Hi guys, Chad Trofgruben here. Welcome back to the Steve and the Alien Anime Studio tutorial series. This lesson will be focusing specifically on the UFO. We want to insert a shot when we are video editing when we see the UFO getting hit by a few bullets, because we already animated the alien shooting the gun, and so it'll just add a good reference to have the UFO taking some of those shots. So to get started with this particular animation, we need to have a blank document, so just a brand new document, and we will be importing some assets here that we have already created. So first, let's start with the sky. Go to File, Import, Anime Studio Object, and just locate one of your sceneries that you have drawn up, and we can just import the sky from that. So I'll click the sky and click OK. The other background piece we want are the mountains, because we're not going to see the ground from where we are because the UFO is up higher. So go to File, Import, Anime Studio Object, find another highway shot, and we'll bring in the first set of mountains. And then I'll just import in the second set of mountains as well. Okay, now we'll probably move these mountains down a bit because right now, of course, you just see the sky right below them and that's not really good. So I'll highlight both pieces of the mountain and just bring them down. And actually, this was imported backwards. I want this mountain range above this mountain range, so we can have it positioned like that. And we can adjust this some more once we animate out the scene, but we'll just leave this for right now, and we can deal with it as we get closer to completing this animation. Now we'll need, of course, the UFO. So let's go to File, Import, Anime Studio Object, and then we can locate the UFO, which should be in your props lesson. If you're organizing your folders according to our lessons, you'll find it when we drew out the props. And just double click to bring it in. And this will be a bit bigger since we're doing a close-up. And we can also use the camera for that as well. Just depends on what you want to do. And we'll also make sure that the UFO is above both mountain ranges, so that is good to go there. The next step is to create some layers where we will have flashes. Essentially, what we're going to see are flashes hitting the UFO, followed by puffs of smoke, and then scorch marks. So we will ahead of time create the flashes and puffs of smoke. So going into the UFO, we will start with making a new vector layer, and we can name this Flash 1. And then I'll just, on the side here, draw out these flashes. But we can always use the UFO as a point of reference to see how big we should make them as well. So taking the Add Point tool with sharp corners turned on, and you can also turn autofill on if you wish. We'll come over here to the Style box and choose our stroke to be dark orange, and the fill color to be yellowish. And of course, we'll increase the width to 4. So we'll start right here and just draw out something similar to how we drew out the muzzle flash, except we'll have the spikes going all the way around like this. And there we go. We now have a flash. So let's make now a second flash. We'll make a new layer, vector, Flash 2, and using the Add Point tool, we can come over here to the Style box, And we'll just alter the colors slightly. I'll make this a more fainter yellow for the fill, and I'll just as well adjust the outline color. And we just want to make something really similar to this, but a little bit different. That's why we're doing a second flash. So something like that. And now let's make 3 more. New vector layer, flash 3. Grab our add point tool, and once again we will adjust this. And then just draw out another flash. Another vector layer, and flash 4. And then 1 more. I'll go something yellow again. Okay. We now have some variation for the flashes. Now next, I'll do the same with the smoke puffs. So I'll make a new layer, name this smoke 1. Let's come over here, take the add point tool. This time I'll turn sharp corners off, and then the fill color will be gray with a stroke of dark gray. Now for this, I'm just going to make some round, bubbly looking puffs, essentially. They're going to be puffs of smoke. So I'm going to kind of stick with that theme. Just like that. And if we want, we can come in here and select the line width tool and just click on these edges of these lines and make them 0, just to kind of taper them off and give them a more stylized look. And now we'll make another layer and another puff of smoke. So, grabbing the add point tool, we'll start right about here. And again, just try to make a variation of what we saw here. Okay, another layer. And then smoke 4. And then one more. Just like that. Okay. So now we have those puffs of smoke drawn out, and we can also do some line tapering on some of these too if you wish. So now, what we need to do next is animate the UFO out so that it looks like it's bobbing up and down, that it's flying through the sky, but we are going to take the visible and invisible abilities we can use with the animated layer effects and just kind of pop these in when appropriate, when we need them to come into play. And then they will then taper off through an opacity animation, which we'll use in the layer effects as well. And then finally, we will add some scorch marks and animate the background so that it looks like that the UFO is actually moving. So first, let's line up where we want each flash to hit. Zoom in here and grab the Translate Layer tool. And starting with Flash 1, I'll move it and position it about right here. I'll do the same now for all the other flashes. Again, these won't be appearing all at the same time, but it's kind of good to know where we're going to be putting all of these into play. Okay, so we'll go like that. And now we'll do the same for the puffs of smoke. So puff of smoke 1 will go here. 2 will go here. And they don't have to correspond with the flashes. Like smoke 1 doesn't have to be with flash 1. It's just mostly however you want to line them up. It might make it easier to put them together as numbers, but I'll just leave it like this for right now. And now we want to go in and hide all of the layers except for Flash 1. So starting with Flash 2, we'll double click, allow animated layer effects, and deselect visible. And you'll keep doing this now for all of the layers that are either smoke or flash. So now, for the first flash, we want it to basically come this way and enlarge and disappear. Because the bullets are hitting the UFO, but the UFO is moving forward, so the flashes are going to basically trail off to the left. So let's start at frame 1 and take the Translate Layer tool and click on the screen to make that keyframe. And let's do the same for the Scale Layer tool as well. Now advance forward about 5 frames. We will move the flash like this and then enlarge it as well. And then we can readjust it if it kind of goes off course like that. So now we basically have it come forward like this. And I could probably even enlarge it a little bit more. There we go. So it's going to fly out like that. Now let's go back to frame 1 and then double click on the Flash 1 layer. Choose Allow Animated Layers and make sure that your opacity is set to 99%. And click OK. That'll essentially create a keyframe while keeping the flash still a solid color. And then when we get to frame 6, let's double click and choose the opacity to be 0 and click OK. So now, if we render this out at this point, you can see that the opacity is less. And if you go here and render, it's even less. It's just hard to tell when you are doing it in Anime Studio because it doesn't show the effect sometimes, depending on which effect you're using. But you can always double check by rendering out your frames in between and making sure that it is working. So we now need to add the smoke in. So let's find the smoke puff we designated to this flash, which is smoke 3. And now at frame 1, I will double click on smoke 3 and turn that visible. And I will also make sure I move it below flash 1. So now the flash goes away as well as the smoke, except the smoke will go up like this and will enlarge like so. So just like that. Now we want to do the same like we did with the flash, and that is we want to animate the opacity. So make sure you are on frame 1 and double click and choose animated layer effects and make sure that the opacity is 99%. Then go to frame 6 and double click and make sure that the opacity is set to 0. So now basically you have both of these things disappearing as they venture off. We will add in the scorch marks last, so we don't have to worry about that. All we have to do now is focus on the remaining flashes for the project. So starting at about frame 4 or 5, I'll bring in the new flash. So double click on flash 2 and make that visible. And that happens right here. So now we just once again make sure we click on it with our translate layer tool and scale tools to create a keyframe. And then it's gonna go like this, move off like that, and then we can just enlarge it. So then it looks like this. Now we also want to double click on that layer again. And I could have done this actually when I turned it visible. I just kind of separated the two steps. We want to turn it to opacity of 99% at the start of it. And then at the end, we double click, go in, and change it to 0. So now we have that going into play. Next, we want to, of course, get the corresponding smoke, which would be smoke 1 for this, and bring it below flash 2. And then at the start of this, which is frame 4, we double click, and we make this visible, and change the opacity to 99%. And then the cloud of smoke will go up a few frames. So at about frame 11, it doesn't have to match exactly your flash either. It can last longer. It just depends on how you want to do it. We will, of course, make sure before we do this that we set keyframes though, or else it's going to fly around before we want it to fly around. So make sure you're on frame 4 and you set keyframes for the translate layer and the scale layer. So then right about here, we will have it go all the way up, and then we will enlarge it. Then at that frame as well, we double click on the layer and we change the opacity to 0. And then you just have that going like that. And actually, I'm not sure what I was thinking. I wanted to make sure this goes over like this. So it's kind of flying at an angle. Okay. So next, let's bring in the next flash. So flash number 3 is right here. So at about frame 9, I will double click and make it visible, change the opacity to 99 and click OK. Go in a few frames. And then we want to make sure that we set the keyframes down for the translate and scale abilities. and then just go in a few frames and then glide it out like that and enlarge it. Double click and change the opacity to 0. And now it's, again, of course, basically rinse and repeat, as I'm sure you could probably guess by now. Then we grab that smoke and we put it below the Flash 3, and we double click on the smoke, make it visible, change the opacity to 99%. Click it to make sure that it is keyframed for both translate layers and scale layers. And then move it up and scale it. And also double click on it and make the opacity 0%. So we have that looking good. Okay, we want yet another flash. So we'll put one right here. And this will be flash number 4. So double click, visible, 99. Take the translate layer, click, take the scale, click, and then move this like that. And then scale the layer. And at that point, oops, I forgot to place a scale down for the beginning, so I'll just go back to the origin frame and scale it down like that. There we go. See, that's what happens if you don't put the keyframes down, then they enlarge early and then they get all out of shape. But anyway, we want it to disappear at this frame, at frame 19, so we double click on Flash 4, change the opacity to 0. Then we want the smoke to go along with it, so smoke number 5 will go down below Flash 4, double click, visible, 99. Set our keyframes down. And then just have it go up like this. Like that. Keep forgetting to resize these, but anyway, there you go. And then on that last frame, we wanted to, of course, disappear. Opacity 0, and click OK. So we have one more flash, and we'll put it right about here on the timeline at about frame 19. This whole animation is going to be about 24 to 30 seconds. It's very short. So we'll take Flash 5, double click, make it visible, and change the opacity to 99%. And then click to make a keyframe and send it out like this, and then enlarge it. Just like that. And also at that last frame, double click and of course change the opacity to 0. And then bring the smoke down for this corresponding item. We click to add keyframes, and we double click to bring in the opacity and the visibility. And of course we have this smoke go up. There we go. And then change the opacity to 0. Okay, now if you play this back, it's going to be hard to kind of see how this all will play out right now because of how the opacity isn't working until you render it out in video format. But finally, we need to just add some scorch marks to where the flashes hit. So this is actually going to be pretty easy. I'll make a new layer above the body of the UFO and name it Scorch Marks. Now, we could draw out the scorch marks and then place them in, kind of like how we were doing with the flashes. But there is an easier way to do it. And I don't recommend you do this all the time because, especially if you're not familiar with Anime Studio, it can get kind of confusing. But first, we need to do one thing, and that is go to Edit, Preferences. And you want to deselect the box that says Enable Drawing Tools Only on Frame 0. And then click OK. Now, while on the Scorch Marks layer, let's grab the Freehand tool and change the stroke color to black. And I'll also change my fill color to black. And now, still making sure you're on the Scorch Marks layer and making sure that you're also on frame 1. Let's just zoom in here, and I can just disable the view of these assets momentarily. And let's also deselect the autofill option. And now coming in here, we just simply draw out a scorch mark. Now let's move along to this frame right down here, and we'll do the same. And then we keep going along. We have it right here, and we do that. And finally right here. Okay, so now you have scorch marks for when your flashes hit. And again, you can see this if you just deselect that momentarily. You can see that these appear as the flashes come in. So you're essentially doing frame by frame animation for this particular animation. I can see I was off on this scorch mark, the first scorch mark, and I'm not sure why it turned gray on me, even though the other ones are black. That's kind of a mystery to me, but we'll leave it for right now, and I'll just make sure I move it up like this. There we go. Okay, so now we have the scorch marks in place, and the last thing we really need to do is focus in on the UFO movement. But before we do anything else, make sure you go back to Edit and Preferences and turn your Enable Drawing Tools only on frame 0 back on. That way there's no mistakes if you were to accidentally draw something while you're trying to animate in the timeline. I think it's a good idea to have that disabled as a rule, but for cases like this, it really helps when doing these types of quick little animations. So finally, let's come back out here to the UFO, and we will insert a keyframe at frame 1 using our Translate Layer tool. And I can add some movements into the UFO. So at like frame 12, I'll just dip the UFO down. And at frame 30, I can bring it back up like this. So you can kind of just see it going like that. It's bobbing up and down. And then let's go back to frame 1 and select our mountains here. Make sure they are down far enough. And I may need to extend these out a bit. So I might just copy the mountains like I did on my other alien shooting animation. So I'll just select this mountain range and copy and paste. Just nudge over like that. And the same with this mountain range. So now, starting at frame 1, making sure that, again, you have that keyframe in play for the Translate Layer tool. We just come in and we'll just animate to frame 30, and we'll just move the mountains over like this. And do the same now for the background mountain range. Okay, and also I'll make sure I right-click and choose linear for both of these mountain movements. The UFO doesn't have to be linear because it moves good the way it is. And that is that. So now what we'll do is save this. Just go to File and Save and make sure you save it. and then export the animation out. Again, I showed you how to do that in the beginning of this lesson when we started our animations. So just choose your options and save the video and keep it safe because we will be using it soon when we edit this whole thing together. Anyway, that wraps up this lesson. I hope you guys found it helpful, and I will see you next time.